Retro Gaming Radio.
I'm Shane Armonroe, your host.
Comprehensive online
Welcome to Retro Gaming Radio.
Welcome to Retro Gaming Radio. Comprehensive
I'm Shane Armonroe, your host. Welcome to the program.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the April 2002 edition of Retro Gaming Radio. I'm Shane Armonroe, your host. Thanks for tuning in. Well, we've got a pretty big show. Not as big of a show as I was hoping we were going to have. I've basically been down sick with bronchitis about the last 3 weeks, and I'm still on it, so you'll have to forgive me if I sound kind of funny this month. We have a lot to talk about all the same. We didn't get a chance to get an interview set up, which we really hope to have for April. But we will have an interview in May, and we will have a lot of Brian Kid Hype, the producer, Smith on the show next month, because he's going to be here in town with me, and we're going to be recording a show together for you. You're going to really enjoy that. Plus, we'll have an interview and all sorts of good stuff. What are we going to talk about this month? Well, it doesn't seem like we have a lot to talk about. We really do. We're going to read one of your letters on the air, which happens to tie into this month's rant, which is probably going to be a lot of the show, about what is a classic game. And we're going to talk about that. I think you're all going to enjoy that segment. We're also going to look at a couple of PC light guns by request. I've had a few people write in saying, hey, we'd like to know what kind of light guns we can use on the PC. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about a follow-up on the Kiki Joy PlayStation Dual Shock Controller adapter for your PC. We've had some people write in with some problems, and we found another solution for you that's going to take care of that the Kiki Joy problems for you, which is great. It's so nice to have people that can write in and give us a different slant on a lot of the hardware and software we review, especially when it comes to hardware, because it always works differently for different people, and people use it for different things. And while I never noticed that the Kiki Joy wouldn't allow you to use Chun-Li's lightning kick, it worked fine for everything I used it for. But as you know from the last show, the Kiki Joy has some latency problems. Well, we've got a product that we can give you now that costs less than the Kiki Joy, and it actually works better. You can pull off Chun-Li's lightning kick. I actually tested it myself. So we're going to talk more about that product this show. We're going to talk a little bit about what we got lined up for CGE, the Classic Gaming Expo. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're starting to more solidify what we're going to do and how we're going to run the show down there. So we're going to talk about that too. But first off, let's start with this month's rant. What is a classic game? Now I'm going to read you this email first. It's from Evan Casey. Evan Casey writes in, after hearing the letter that was read on February's Retro Gaming Radio, I must say I got a little pissed at the Super Nintendo generation ruining the emulation scene. Personally, I can say that the MU scene has been quite trash, but I feel blaming a bunch of 15 to 20-year-olds for the fault is rather unfair, as well as implying we're not classic gamers. That was the bit that really irked me. The SNES Genesis era was a great time for gaming. Games such as Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy 4 through 6, Street Fighter 2, Super Mario World, Super Castlevania 4, one of the best Castlevanias in my opinion, Earthworm Jim, etc. I feel these games were excellent, fun, addicting, and simple, just like the great classics. So if 16-bit isn't classic, what is? 8-bit? Commodore 64? The real ruiners of the scene are all those people that see emulation as a way to steal from people that deserve money for their great work, which they can easily purchase at any decent gaming store. You know, the kids that download The Legend of Zelda to play on an N64 emulator, or people that download all the new games for the Game Boy Advance. Great system for 2D gaming, just because they can get it for free. As for what I define as the generation that's not classic, I feel it's the kids who had a PlayStation as their first console, or even a Nintendo 64. That's the generation that doesn't know a good set of classics, but what can you expect if the first game the kid plays starts out with a 3-minute fully rendered full-motion video? Sincerely, Evan F. Casey. Well, there's a lot of things in this letter that I wholeheartedly agree with. You really can't expect somebody who started off on a PlayStation or an N64 to really understand what a classic game is. The thing is, a lot of people, and including myself, we often misuse the term classic game to mean old game. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody else. If I talk about a game that came out in 1985, I'll call it a classic game. In reality, it's really an old game. Pac-Man, for example, is a classic. Naughty Boy is not a classic, but they're both old games. And if you want to know why Pac-Man's a classic and Naughty Boy is not a classic, we'll continue. My producer and I actually shot a bunch of emails back and forth about our opinions on what a classic game is. And a classic game is not every old game. A classic game has to fit into a certain set of parameters to make it classic. And I think most people out there are going to agree with what I call a classic game. And if I'll run through these, and I'm sure we're going to get floods of email about this, and that's cool. I want to hear what you have to say. But think about these parameters, and I'm going to tell you my producer's point of view on some of the ones that he maybe disagreed or slanted me on. The first thing, a modern game, that is a console that is still currently alive. Let's say PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube. A modern game that changed the face of gaming forever, if this is even possible anymore, is called an innovative game until it gets old. Let's say PlayStation 2 goes away. Then it becomes a classic game. A good example of this is Choo Choo Rocket on the Dreamcast. Choo Choo Rocket's a fairly new game, but the Dreamcast is dead, right? You can't buy when the games are on sale. They're not making any new games. So for all intents and purposes, the Dreamcast is dead. Choo Choo Rocket started off as an innovative game. It is now a classic game. Brian says he thinks it's an instant classic when it redefines a genre. Pac-Man was a classic in 1982 in his book. Now, to me, when a game first comes out, it's a sensation or it's an innovation when it changes the face, not necessarily an instant classic. Instant classic sounds like a really terrible marketing term that you see like on every $14.95 game that you see at Walmart or Babbage's. An instant classic, says New York Times. Yeah, right, instant classic. Okay, what else might define a classic game? Well, an old game, of course, that's forever changed the face of gaming is a classic game. Some of the games that Brian wanted to say was a classic that would be more of a modern game would be Jet Grind Radio. You think I'm thinking about classic games? Jet Set Willy. Don't tell me that just wasn't. I don't know. I'm not even going to get into Jet Set Willy. Jet Grind Radio is definitely a classic in Brian's book as well as Crazy Taxi, and I could not agree more. Crazy Taxi and Jet Grind Radio have ports on modern games, gaming systems, so I really have trouble considering that a classic. I do feel that Jet Grind Radio and Crazy Taxi were innovative, but if you've listened to my past shows, well, I love Crazy Taxi. Let's not forget Crazy Taxi owes its roots to Space Taxi on the Commodore 64. If you play Space Taxi on the C64 and then play Crazy Taxi, you will be completely convinced that somebody at Sega has played and loved Space Taxi so much they turned into Crazy Taxi. I know every now and then an idea can cross over and two people completely independent think of the same thing. But in this case, I find it really hard to believe. Those of you who played Space Taxi know what I'm talking about. My next point about classic games, remakes or rehashes can never be classic games. Street Fighter, the original Street Fighter, classic game. Street Fighter Turbo 3 Super Alpha the movie 37, that's not a classic. Sorry. The only exceptions to these sort of situations are things like Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man. The games are so close in what you do and how you do it, yet there was enough innovation behind it, there was enough change where the basic premise of the game wasn't destroyed in order to continue the saga. Now, no one really believes that Ms. Pac-Man's a sequel or a remake of Pac-Man. It's a standalone game. But these are the sort of gray areas that you have to look at when you start looking at this particular rule. Brian chimes in that Ms. Pac-Man was the first multi-maze game and not really in the same league as Pac-Man, and I agree. And Super Pac-Man and Baby Pac-Man also took the paradigm a step further while still keeping the initial drive of the game. Now, we were talking about Junior Pac-Man, which I think is kind of funny. To me, Junior Pac-Man was kind of the last-ditch effort to kind of keep the saga alive, and I thought it really showed, but Brian thought it was really innovative. So, kind of a different slant on it. Of course, he didn't like Pac-Man Plus, which I thought was innovative. So, there you have it. So we both agreed that Pac-Man Jr., Junior Pac-Man probably would not be considered a classic. However, it was still a cool game. Okay, my next point of classic game. Original rehashes of classic games can never be classics. Spy Hunter at the arcade, classic. Spy Hunter on the PlayStation 2, not classic. Once you steal the name of a game, Galaga, Dig Dug, Tempest, Spy Hunter, you lose any nods or props for originality. I don't care how different Spy Hunter is for the PlayStation 2. You stole fizzy lifting drinks. You stole the name of the game and you get nothing. Good day, sir. No, I love that bit. The difference between Spy Hunter at the arcade and Spy Hunter for the PlayStation 2 is everything but the name, and you know that, and we all know that. You cannot allow a game that steals a title or takes a title, which automatically brings certain expectations to the table, and expect to get away with it and hope that your game can be classic. It just doesn't work. And prime examples of these are the Galaga Destination Earth, the Centipede Adventure. A lot of the Hasbro remakes were just like this. Barely shared any concept of the game. And I've seen Spy Hunter for the PlayStation 2, so I don't even want to go into that. So let's move along. My next point of contention on classic gamings. There's only one proper conversion of a classic game can be a classic game in itself. For example, Pac-Man at the arcade was a classic game. Pac-Man on the 2600 was not a classic game. Why? Because Pac-Man on the 2600 wasn't enough like the real Pac-Man. They tried hard and they worked with what they had. But let's be honest. Pac-Man on the 2600 was ass. I don't care how you slice it. Pac-Man on the 2600 was ass, okay? Now, what about Pac-Man on another platform? Say, the NES. Now, a lot of you know I'm not a big NES fan, but I got to give them props and give a nod and say that Pac-Man on the NES was a classic game. Why? Because it was the first officially licensed port that was as true to the arcade game as possible. Now, let's just put it this way. Puck-Man, that was Puck, you guys. Come on. This is an MP3. You can hear that. Puck-Man on the C64 was almost pixel perfect to Pac-Man. But it can't be a classic. Why? Because it wasn't Pac-Man, it was Puck-Man. Okay, that falls under the rehash and remake policy. Another good example of this is Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong redefined platform games. In the arcade, Donkey Kong, classic. Donkey Kong on the 2600, not classic. That was the farthest stretch of an arcade port that I've seen in a long time. But Donkey Kong on the ColecoVision, classic. Why? Because everybody, critics, gamers, everybody alike said, wow, that actually looks like the arcade game. It plays and sounds like the arcade game. Very cool. That's what makes the first proper port of a game a classic, when you can pull that off. Okay? Back to onto the next one. Oh, yeah. Now, let me put in Brian's 2 cents here. He agrees that a good console conversion is a classic. But he also goes on to say that Pac-Man 20th Anniversary was not a classic. Now, we corresponded back and forth about this one a little bit. Let me say, if you've heard my previous shows, Pac-Man 20th Anniversary, not this new Pac-Man 2 for the PlayStation 2. We're talking about the original Pac-Man Anniversary for the PlayStation 1. Fabulous game. I thought they took a genre that was basically dead and gone and were able to breathe new life into it. And when you can get away with that, you got to get props and kudos for that. Doesn't necessarily make you a classic, though. It doesn't fall into our parameters. We had a little point of contention. I said I thought Donkey Kong Country should be considered a classic because it took a console game and used rendered graphics. And as far as I know, it was the first game console, not necessarily according to the 3DO people, but let's say popular console, that used rendered graphics. To me, that kind of gave it an impact, a change that changed the face of games. But Brian went on to point out that there were other rendered games first, such as Killer Instinct, and in that respect, Donkey Kong Country should not be considered a classic. So we kind of came to a draw on that one. Next classic gaming point. Blatant knockoffs can never obtain classic status. Puckman, as I said before, as great as it was, cannot get classic status. It was a clone knockoff of Pac-Man. Any game that the first time you see it, the first words out of your mouth is, oh, damn, that's identical to insert favorite game here. You know, you can't get away with total rehashes and remakes that are complete clones and expect to get a classic game nod. Doesn't work. However, there have been games, and these are far and few between, folks. There are games that borrow elements of other games, put them all together, so you don't get a game that's like any other game. But you go to parts of the game and say, oh, well, that's just like Targ, or wow, that's just like Snake, or that's just like this, or that's just like that. Those are the sort of games that you can't be allowed to have as called classics. Okay, let's move on to the next point. Classic status can also be awarded to original games that receive some sort of weird, eerie cult status, either good or bad. For example, E.T. on the 2600, classic game. Why? We all agree that E.T., well, okay, not everybody. Brian, I think, is the only person on the planet that loves E.T. Okay, so I can't say everybody. Almost everybody hated that game, right? But you know what? If you go to anybody like over the age of 26 and say, hey, do you remember E.T. on the 2600? They'll probably shudder. They'll probably wince up their face in this nasty little, and they'll say, oh, God, that game sucked. And they're right. But they remember it. Everybody had it, right? Because they were giving the things away. And, I wouldn't be surprised to remember that Lucky Charms probably had an E.T. card in every box for a certain period of time. Right? But it meets that status, freaky status cult situation. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. A good classic status award that's got a cult following was Grid Runner. Now everyone's, oh, Grid Runner, yeah, Llamasoft, yeah. Grid Runner, I don't remember it making a lot of cash. But you know what? Everybody knew what it was. Everybody still knows what it is, which is amazing. And it's got a freaky cult following. When you say classic game, you look that up in the dictionary, chances are you'll see a screenshot of Grid Runner next to it. Now, that being said, let's move on to the next point. Movie licensed titles can never be classic games unless they match up with the last point, which is having a freaky cult status. Cloak and Dagger, the arcade game. Classic. Why? The game had a very freaky history. It was a vaporware title that tied in with the movie. As you'll recall, if you've seen the movie, and it's a guilty 80s pleasure, I'll admit it. Anything with Dabney Coleman in it is a guilty pleasure. More games, please. Okay, thanks. Cloak and Dagger was in the movie, Cloak and Dagger, obviously. And in the game, they were shown playing Cloak and Dagger, the arcade game, as it turned out, by the way, on an Atari 5200. There were Atari 5200 boxes all over the store where this guy was, quote, quote, playing the game on his, quote, 5200. Well, that created such a rampage. Everybody wanted the game to tie in with the movie, but they never released the 5200 version of Cloak and Dagger. That sort of weird, freaky cult. It's like Last Starfighter. If they would have ever put out the game that they were planning, yeah, I know there was a 5200 port of that, but no. If they'd ever actually put out the real game that they were planning to do, and if you go and look up on the net and look for the Last Starfighter frequently asked questions, they'll tell you that there was a video game planned. There's nothing at all like the game on the movie, of course. But if that game had ever came out, it would have instantly been a classic. Simply because of all of the stigma and freaky stuff around it. Even if the game had totally blew goat, it still would have been a classic game. And there's no way you can get around that. Now, Brian and I talked about the game Tron. My friend Ron's going to be sitting there, his ears just perked up when I said Tron. Tron, in many senses, is not a classic game. Now, before Ron hits the stop button on Winamp, Tron didn't have necessarily a lot of original gaming inside of it. All right, the light cycles were a basic version of Surrounder Snake, which had been around forever. The tanks, as Brian pointed out, was a knockoff of Targ. And the grid bugs and MCP, okay, well, I'm sure if I thought long enough, I could put a tie into those. Why then, if it's a movie tie-in, which automatically disqualifies it for the most part, Tron did have a cult status, but the game didn't necessarily have a cult status. Yet, if you go up to somebody, in our age group that's actually seen a Tron machine, and said, hey, what do you remember about the Tron video game? And even the ones that would say, I never played the game, but I sure remember the cabinet. It had that cool black light coming out of it, the blue glow coming around it. It was totally killer. But I never played it. That's what makes Tron classic. When you go up to somebody and say, somebody who never even played the game, but remembers the cab, and remembers an element of the cab, you got to give them props, and you got to nod your head and say, okay, we'll let it into the Classic Hall of Fame. Discs of Tron, on the other hand, that's a real hard one. Brian says right off the cuff, yeah, Discs of Tron's a classic game. I have to kind of think about that one, because Discs of Tron, the gameplay was unique, the perspective was fairly unique, the controls were very unique. The environmental cab was just cool as hell. When you walked by it, you couldn't help but go put a quarter in it, or 50 cents, I think it was at the time. Had the cool speech and had a good atmosphere about it. But was the game any fun? That's really the key point. A lot of people love Discs of Tron. I thought it was kind of frustrating. At the same time, who am I to say? Brian says Discs of Tron classic. I say, maybe he gets a nomination, but not necessarily the award. Now, the next point, a game does not have to sell well or be brutally overfeatured to be a classic. It must, however, fit into the other criteria that we're talking about. Brian's response is, tell the fighting game idiots that. I'll let you guys just mull around on that one on your own. Suffice to say, games that sold 10 copies can be classics just as easy as a game like E.T. that sold like 20 million copies. I wouldn't be surprised to see another E.T. game pop up with Spielberg re-releasing E.T. to the theaters and on DVD. Crazy. Next point of classic gaming. A port of a game on a different platform other than the original platform can be a classic if it significantly improves or markedly shows progress and here's the big part of it, must follow the original game 100% without deviation, as well as meet the other criteria for a classic game. Let me give you an example, because this is a pretty obscure category here. Prince of Persia originated on the Apple II. If you've played the Apple II version, you know it was less than cool. I mean, it was cool for the time because of the game and stuff. But, you look at the graphics, you look at the sound, and let's just say it could have been done better. Right? Obviously, it's Apple II. What do you want? All right, now, the Amiga version of Prince of Persia is by far the prettiest, the most identical to the original game, not this weird 3D Prince of Persia crap that just came out. What was up with that? But the Amiga port was 100% the same game. No changes, no new power-ups, none of that other crap that remakes usually have. This was a port, but it was beautiful. The sound was dramatically improved. It became a totally different game while retaining everything about the game that made it classic to begin with. These sort of ports don't happen very often, folks, and they usually happened in the transition period where the IBM PC could make beeps in 16-color graphics, while machines like the C64 and Amiga were running full-color, full-stereo sound. A lot of times, the ports, games originated on the PC, got ported over to the Amiga or the 64, and turned into complete classics on their own while leaving the original port in the dust. That can happen. Next point of contention, a classic or a gaming platform. Okay, this is more of a direct answer to my listener who wrote in. A gaming platform gets a classic status and ranking based on the ratio of classic games to crap games. Okay? This is why when I come up here and I talk about classic gaming, the NES and the Super NES often rank the lowest on my console classic status. The NES had 1.21 gigamillion games for it, right? But let's face it, there weren't that many Pac-Mans, okay, on the NES. All right. Yes, I will give the ultimate nod and say yes, Super Mario Brothers on the NES was a classic. But you look at all of the crappy arcade ports that came over to the NES. Jackal. What were some of the other ones? There were so many of them. And Brian chimes in and says, NES conversions pissed me off so much I didn't even buy an SNES until after the system died. You can't call it a conversion when all you did was steal the name. At least you can say this about Sega and Atari. Either it was an exact arcade port or they just didn't do it. That to me speaks miles about a gaming system. Okay? And that's a lot of times why I don't consider NES and SNES games and systems to be classic in nature. They're old, they're dead, but do they rate a classic status? Where do they rate amongst the other consoles? Okay? Now let's look at it. Did Nintendo NES have some classic games? Sure it did. Did Super Nintendo have some classic games? Well, it's hard to really think of an SNES game that follows all of the bullet points that I just read off to you about what I consider a classic game. Okay? You can say that Star Fox was a classic game because it redefined shoot-'em-up flying games. Okay? I don't necessarily follow that belief. Okay? There were other flying games that redefined what a flying game or a fighting action flying game should be. Okay? Like I said, sometimes only one game in a genre can get the classic status. Then it becomes knockoffs and remakes. I think what probably annoyed me about the Nintendo quote-quote classic consoles is, like Brian said, the NES conversions were crap. I'm sorry, folks. Especially if you compared it with the ports that went to the C64 or the Atari 800. Those ports were very clean, and in many cases were just like the arcade. The NES ports, like he said, basically stole the name, and that was pretty much it. The SNES bugged me. I mean, there's so many reasons. I don't even want to go into all of them, but basically the sanitation system that Nintendo went on the rampage to accomplish for the SNES, to me, was a symbol of I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is, but I'll just give you an example. You can fashion your own outlook. Nintendo kept very close control of its properties, so to speak. Now, Midway, when they released Mortal Kombat, the Mortal Kombat games, at that time for the consoles that were available, they basically did what is a lot of people still today consider to be the best port of Mortal Kombat 2 to a console. Okay? But those of you who know all about Mortal Kombat 2 on the SNES knows there was no blood. Now, Mortal Kombat without blood, without fatalities, without the trademark items of the game, is no longer a port of the game. It's a hack at best. It's a crappy remake at worst. Okay? When Nintendo told Midway, you don't get to release Mortal Kombat 2 until you sanitize it. We are a happy family company, and we don't think that you should have blood, guts, gore, and fatality on the screen. All right? This goes back to the same old censorship issues that we've had to deal with for the last 40, 50 years. Okay? If you don't like what's on TV, turn the channel. if you don't want your kids playing a bloody, gory Mortal Kombat game, you don't buy the cartridge for them, okay? Nintendo had no business telling developers what they could and couldn't develop, okay? Look back at the classic consoles, okay? The good classic consoles. Look at Genesis. You never saw Sega smacking people around for having blood on the screen. Go back to the C64, okay? There was no ownership of companies trying to produce something. I saw a game called, what was it, Smurf Massacre. I wish I still had a copy of that. Hey, if there's any of the listeners that have a copy of Smurf Massacre for C64, send me the disc image. I'd love to see that again. There's no governing body, okay? You look at the 2600. Now, granted, you couldn't get a lot of gore and stuff on the 2600. It just wasn't possible. But you didn't see gaming companies or console companies regulating, sanitizing, and basically limiting your choices like Nintendo did. Okay? That to me was the stupidest thing they could have done. That to me means I am not as important to them as the gay-ass media is that controls and says, oh, Nintendo had blood on their version of Mortal Kombat. It's like, it goes back to the Night Trap thing, okay? Nothing pisses me off more than watching the media take something, blow it out of proportion. And the funny thing is, you saw senators and governors and all these politicians bad-mouthing Night Trap, saying that your job as the player was to kill girls. It was obvious at that point in time. 1, they'd never seen the game. 2, they'd never played the game. And 3, they didn't know anything about the game. Okay? Based on that, based on the bullying media, I believe Nintendo said, well, we're going to make a kid-safe friendly system. All right? And all that did was piss off a generation of consumers that were ready to get die-hard ports. The sound on Mortal Kombat 2 on the NES was brilliant. Okay? I can't deny that. It kicked the Genesis's butt. But you know what? After playing both at, I don't remember what the big discount store was back then, Walmart or whatever, when I played it on those two machines, I instantly went and I actually bought a Sega Genesis just to play Mortal Kombat 2. All right? The NES or the SNES, not even an option. Why? Because they destroyed and took it upon themselves to dictate to a developer what they could and couldn't do. And, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that sort of censorship. Super Nintendo lost dozens and dozens of points for me. I hear the same thing. Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy. I hear these same titles thrown around all over the place. In all honesty, those are the Super Nintendo generation kiddies that say that stuff. I've yet to find a classic gamer like myself, like my producer, like my friends, who have a rich understanding and enjoyment of classic games that liked any of those games. Castlevania. I don't know any of my friends or any of my close, my close game players that liked that stuff, that liked Castlevania, that liked Chrono Trigger. Okay? To me, those were a platform-dependent, generational-dependent game. That does not qualify it for a classic gaming status. Okay? Classic game is Tetris. Everybody in the world knows what Tetris is. I could walk up to somebody on the street who doesn't own a computer, doesn't own a console, never has owned a console, and say, hey, Tetris. Oh, yeah, I've heard of Tetris. Why? Tetris is a classic game. Pac-Man. Everybody knows what Pac-Man is, right? Everybody knows what Pac-Man is. Everybody knows what Tetris is. These are the sort of games, these are the sort of things that get included in a conversation about classic games. Chrono Trigger does not fall into a casual conversation. You say, hey, let's talk about the best classic games ever made. You hear Pac-Man. You hear Donkey Kong. You hear Space Invaders. For God's sake, Space Invaders. You say, Chrono Trigger. You know what? Arcades at that time, when Space Invaders came out, had pinball machines. Pachinko machines, right, in Japan and Asia. Those were the hot items. When Space Invaders came out, they took that phenomenon and they removed their pinball machines. They removed their pachinko machines. You could go into a Japanese arcade, and along every wall that there was floor space to do so was a Space Invaders machine. Not Space Invaders Deluxe. Not Space Invaders 1990. Not Chrono Trigger, the arcade game. Space Invaders. Stupid, back and forth, shoot, advancing alien Space Invaders. And people quit their jobs. People snuck out of their jobs. People stole money, robbed banks. They did whatever it took to feed a Space Invaders machine. And then Pac-Man came along and stole all the Space Invaders quarters. That's a phenomenon. That is a classic. That doesn't happen anymore. Okay? That plain doesn't happen anymore. And yes, you can look at it as a change in culture. Arcades aren't big anymore. You know? And yes, you can tell me about how people stood in line for 5 days to get a GameCube. Okay? People are cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And you know what? The people who quit their jobs to play Space Invaders were cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs too. But you know what? Today, right now, all the people that stood in line to get a PlayStation or what was it, the N64 version of Zelda? There was some game that came out with a bunch of hype. I thought maybe it was Super Mario 3. I don't remember. But anyway, there was a game that came out. See, this is how you know it's not a classic. I don't even remember the damn thing. They released a game that had so much promotion, had so much user anticipation, gamer anticipation, that they sold out, they pre-ordered, sold out. People were waiting in line to get this game. Where's that game today? Who remembers that game today? Who still has a copy of the game? You know? Who has stories to regale about how they quit their job to go pick up a Super Mario 3 cartridge for their kid? You know? This is what I'm talking about. You can tell me how classic games like Final Fantasy are. Okay? You can tell me how classic Super Mario 36 with FX chip capability in the SNES was. The honest truth is they don't warrant the status. And if you look at it, if you go through all the points I've brought up, and you talk to people, you know, the classic gaming community in general, you'll understand why those games aren't classics. You know? It's important to realize, too, that classics follow generations. Unfortunately, there was a rift that there are people like me and my clan, the people who listen to the show, that grew up during the video game craze. They knew what the 80s video game crash was all about. They watched it happen, and they saw the effects. They saw new consoles coming out of the water. Nowadays, there really isn't a lot of the innovation that you see, that you saw before. In the old days, when the Commodore 64 was in its prime, let's say, developers didn't write games knowing that in a year and a half another console would come out and they'd be able to write better games, you know. They didn't look at the chronology of gaming the same way as they do now. Right now, if you were a video game developer for a major console, you know that in a year and a half you'll have another console to develop for. Something new, more powerful, and better, right? What you're doing is biding time until the next platform comes along. This is why the licensing and the remakes and the rehashes are becoming so popular. You know, you only have a short window to take advantage of the sensationalism of a console. All right? In the old days, there was none of that stuff. Okay? There was no minimum maximum system requirements. You either had an Atari 800 or you didn't have an Atari 800. You had a 2600, you didn't have a 2600. You know, it's not you have a Nintendo 64 and a memory expansion pack to play Alone in the Dark. You know, I'm surprised, to be honest with you, that the Xbox hasn't magically come out with an expansion pack yet. But you know, somewhere on that machine, there's a little removable panel, or there's some little plug that nobody knows what it does, or they've managed to model a controller port into some sort of an expansion device, and they're going to follow the same pattern of PCs and make the Xbox expandable in some way. Even if it's just into a computer. You know it's going to happen. I mean, you could bank money on it. I think I do have some money on it somewhere. But suffice to say, today there is no path set for classic gaming. You know, games come out, they're tooted, they're forgotten. You know, that's the simple truth. Or they're spawned into so many sequels you can't help but remember it. What's Final Fantasy's up to, what, 10 now? Well, yeah, obviously you're not going to forget what Final Fantasy is because there's a brand new game complete with lots of full motion video on the commercial and no actual gameplay, which, by the way, one of my listeners wrote in on ICQ and said, you know what pisses me off? Shelling out big cash for a game I saw on TV on a commercial, taking it home, and finding out what they showed me on the commercial was all full motion video. All cutscenes, no actual gameplay. I said, yeah, welcome to modern video game marketing. Video games cannot stand, it seems, on gameplay alone anymore. There's a whole new side to video games. It's called marketing. And it has nothing to do, you know, in the old days, it used to be that a game would sell itself. And if you listen to my old shows, I talk about this endlessly. A game would sell itself on word of mouth, merit of gameplay, and usually the fact that the box shots on the back the screenshots on the back looked better for the version that you were looking to buy than on the other versions. Classic example is like Defender of the Crown. You know, the Amiga version looked like a movie at the time. The C64 version looked pretty good. The IBM version looked like crap. And they had all the versions on the back of the box, you know, IBM graphics shown. Yeah, no, obviously they showed not the gameplay, but they showed the stills, the title screen. That sort of thing still happens today. And unfortunately, the fact that there are shorter and shorter development windows, there are more and more game development windows. You know, now you've got Christmas and you've got summer. Now you've got two windows you have to meet when you're developing games. And we can go into the 3D engine whoring thing on another show, because I'm going to interview in a coming show one of the developers at Gearbox. And you're going, hey, why does that name sound familiar? Gearbox was responsible for Half-Life. They're also responsible for the very successful Tony Hawk series. We're going to have one of their developers on the show, and we're going to ask him a battery of different questions, but we're going to have him talk about why Half-Life is arguably the best first-person shooter ever made, and why, even though it was based on the Quake engine, which we all know is like sacrilege to me, how they managed to pull it off, and some of their own particular stories that go along behind that. And we're going to talk to him, and I think, you know, he's got a different conception of how this whole engine whoring thing works. He hates that expression, by the way. He's probably going to kill me when he hears the show. But suffice to say that it's a different era now. There's no such thing as a classic game anymore. From about the PlayStation on, there really isn't a path for a classic game anymore. The kids growing up on PlayStation, in 20 years, they're not going to remember a classic game from the PlayStation. They're not going to remember a classic game or a game from the Nintendo 64. Most people have already forgot about the N64. You know, I could tell you the N64 had one of the greatest games ever made, Mario Kart 64. You know, often imitated, you know, over and over again. But Mario Kart on the N64 was perfection, and they deserve the props for that. But, you know, Mario Kart's not going to be what's remembered, you know. In fact, I don't think there'll be a lot remembered, and that's unfortunate. You know, video games do not hold the importance for today's generation as they did for our generation. And I think that's an important point to make. What will happen? You know, what will happen with this show when I've talked about everything and there's really no more consoles and there's no more classic gaming stuff to talk about, because there really isn't any classic gaming anymore. You know, you can say, you know, isn't 16-bit classic? Well, it is and it isn't. Well, I've managed to prattle on almost the whole show about this. Wow. Pretty neat, which is good because we don't have a whole lot more to talk about. And I'm sorry about that. If I really wish I'd have been feeling better this month, we would have had a lot more to talk about. Folks, I received an update about the Akiko CD32 and CD-TV emulator that I felt I just had to share with you. If you remember last episode, I talked about this very cool emulator based on WinUAE that allows you to actually play CD32 and CD-TV titles right on your PC. If you don't know what the CD32 and CD-TV is, please listen to the last episode. We talk about that in depth. The Akiko 1.5 version just came out, and you'll be happy to know that after slamming him hard with a bunch of issues that I found while testing my own CD32 games, he has rushed right in there and taken care of almost all of them. Most of the game issues are fixed. He's added some great new features that are just totally cool. You can now mount an ISO or a bin instead of actually having the actual CD in the drive. And the nice thing is he put support for the ISO plus MP3 format, which means instead of having an 800 megabyte image of Super Stardust on your hard drive, you can have the 4 megabyte image plus 7 2 megabyte MP3 files. So that's a very cool thing. All the controls are fixed. He's got a whole bunch of other products working a lot better in this version. Again, the Akiko emulator is shareware. It's a $15 fee. The guy's really good about getting you a key right away. I do have a link to their sites. You can check it out. If you're at all interested in CD32, if you've never seen the CD32 CD player, if you've never seen the CD-TV intro boot screen, this is all classic nostalgia you can't do without. So go check it out. Again, the Akiko CD32 emulator. But I do want to talk about light guns. And this is a problem issue, and we're gonna resolve this on a future show. I've had several people say, we want to know how we can use a light gun on the PC. Well, frankly, right now light guns are fairly proprietary, and so far they require a Windows 95, 98 ME architecture. They require a 60 hertz display, and they require 640 by 480 resolution. Now, find a game that meets that. Find a system that meets those requirements. Almost everybody I know has moved on to Windows 2000 or XP, and frankly, it's because Win95, the Win9X architecture is total ass. I mean, memory handling is a joke. I don't even know how the operating system managed to stand on its feet as long as it did before something stable like the NT kernel came about. But yet there must still be people using it. But right now, every computer in my house is running an NT kernel, which means I can't review a light gun for you because 2 of them that I've tried sent to me by the manufacturers do not work on WinXP or Win2K. That being said, I'm going to have to go and hunt down a box that I can actually set these guns up and try them out for you. Suffice to say, a review of a product that won't run on anything but 6-year-old architecture, that's not going to get a lot of kudos for me. So the whole light gun thing on your PC may just be a pipe dream, especially as technology moves on. Save the light gun games for the consoles, I guess, huh? While we're talking about hardware, the last thing I want to talk about in terms to reviews and hardware is a couple of episodes ago I talked about the Kiki Joy PlayStation 1 controller adapter for your PC. It seems a lot of people like the PlayStation DualShock control, and I do too. Primarily because it's got 2 thumb analog controls, which makes it ideal for some of those interesting and some of the best classic games out there, like Robotron, to a lesser extent Black Widow. Brian, we like Black Widow, right? Those 2 controls, Smash TV, that's another popular one that uses a dual joystick situation. Those of us who are big into classic games need something like that. We could use an analog control that's joystick type style. So the Kiki Joy was one of the first units I'd looked at, and I plugged it in, and it fired up right away. No problems. The controller was instantly recognized. No drivers were needed. Windows XP picked it right up and used it right out of the box. I was just in pig heaven. I plugged it in and started playing MAME. Checked out Robotron. Checked out Zookeeper. Checked out all my favorites. And the adapter looked solid. So I came and gave my review. It wasn't more than a couple weeks later I started getting reports in that the Kiki Joy has a horrible latency problem. Now, for the games that I played, I didn't see the latency problem. But it turns out for some fighting games, like my good old favorite Street Fighter 2, not favorite, Street Fighter 2, there was some latency issues. For example, one listener wrote in and said, I can't do Chun-Li's lightning kick no matter how much I try it with the Kiki Joy. Can you verify that it's not just my system? Well, in all honesty, I thought it was a system. And I told him so. I apologized later when I found out that, yes, indeed, the Kiki Joy did indeed lag enough to where you could not play Street Fighter 2 right. So I instantly made a retraction on the show, on the next show, and said, hey, the Kiki Joy has latency problems. You may want to hold off. You know, if you're going to play Street Fighter 2 or whatever, this may not be the proper solution for you. Well, Jandaman, my favorite freaky hardware importer, who likes to import all this great freaky hardware conversion and accessories from Hong Kong, said, hey, I've got another adapter for you to try. I heard on the last show that we had some problems with the Kiki Joy. I want to send you this other one, have you test it out and see if the latency problem is gone. They're even cheaper than the Kiki Joy. I said, oh, hell yeah, send it over. I'll take a look. So I fired this guy up, and I'll be honest with you, I had problem after problem in the beginning, and I'm going to help you guys out. When I plugged this adapter into my hub, it just simply would not work. When I took and plugged it directly into the USB port on the computer, it worked fine without any problems whatsoever. I spent a long time trying to get it to work on the hub because the Kiki Joy worked on my hub. So suffice to say, I can save you a lot of trouble and tiresome effort if you just plug it right into your computer, skip the hub. Maybe it'll work on your hub, it didn't work on my hub. Anyway, this unit does not have the great cool name that the Kiki Joy has. It doesn't sound like something you're going to see any bonus stage of Choo Choo Rocket. It's simply called PS-PC USB Dual Shock Converter. Now I'm going to have a link in the links area that will take you right to this puppy so that you can get one of these. The going rate's $12, which is down, I think, $4 from the Kiki Joy, which was $16. So once I got past the hub problem, I went ahead and plugged it in, fired it up. Not a problem. The joystick was even pre-calibrated. I didn't even have to go in and calibrate the sucker. Fired up MAME, went in and did the infamous Chun-Li lightning kick with no problems. I played around on some of the other games. No problems there either. I checked basically anything that a reader sent me in that was problematic about the Kiki Joy. This guy looks like your solution. So if you're looking for a solution and you're going to be playing some of these high, fast input games, then you're going to want to pick up the PS to PC USB dual shock controller adapter. And again, I'm going to provide a link for you. It's got a picture of the box and the controller or the adapter there. And I think you'll find that this is a superior product to the Kiki Joy, and it's going to take care of the issues that you were all nice enough to write into me about. And not, of course, not yell at me because, I didn't know about the Kiki Joy's latency problems. So thank you to the readers readers. I think I have a fan club for authors or something. For those of you listeners who wrote in about the Kiki Joy to express your concerns, thank you so much. We're going to get ready to wrap the show up here. Again, I'm sorry I didn't have time to really put together something really killer for you. We'll have lots of interviews, folks, believe me. Let's talk a little bit about the Classic Gaming Expo. I like to talk about it a little bit every episode. Just in case, one of you missed an episode, missed some episodes, or this is your first episode. Classic Gaming Expo is basically the E3 of classic gaming. Okay? It's in Las Vegas, Nevada. Okay? They set it up at the Plaza Hotel, nice hotel. As CGE people, by the way, if you reserve in advance, it's like $50 a night for the room. Any of you stayed in the Plaza Hotel, $50 a night is a steal. Make reservations early. Okay? Basically, they rent like one of the big conference centers, big conference halls. This place is huge. And they wheel in vendors, people who sell classic consoles, classic video games. They bring in Blast from the Past, which has been there, I guess, every year. These guys rock. They bring, from like Maryland, I think, they bring like 100 classic cabs, including like every Laserdisc game ever made, right? I mean, Us versus Them, Don Quixote, Dragon's Lair, Space Ace, you name it, they bring it. Plus, they bring some of the all-time classics. They bring all the Williams games. I mean, they bring some great stuff. They bring video game clocks. I bought a Space Ace clock last year. They bring all sorts of cool stuff. And they have keynote speeches. I mean, you get to hear from the programmers of classic games. I mean, we listened to one guy that worked on Cosmic Arc for the 2600 last year. This guy, I just sat transfixed. I mean, these guys are talking about, how they wrote games on punch cards, folks. And then when they had to make a revision, they made a new punch card and they went in and, oh my God, the stories are just amazing. Last year, the main man, Don Bluth, was there. I don't know if he's going to be there this year yet. I'm hoping so. Last year was a great time to have him there. They have a museum. I think this is probably one of my favorite parts of the trip. They have people who own their most rare, heard but never seen items, like the Halcon home Laserdisc video game. I mean, that's what Dragon's Lair was supposed to be made for. It looks like a big Laserdisc player, but it was basically a home arcade that played Laserdisc games. You'll see one of those there. You'll see Revenge of the Jedi trading cards. Things that you'd always heard about but never saw. You'll see handhelds, Japanese handhelds that doesn't have a single bit of English on the box, of classic games that never got authorized over here, that were never licensed over here. You'll see a full mint Vectrex. You'll see all of these things, and it's fascinating to walk around this place. I mean, they didn't have to post a guard at this place just to make sure that nobody touched or monkeyed with anything, because a lot of this stuff is, priceless to invaluable. So, one of the other neat things is they run video game tournaments. You can enter to win all sorts of stuff. I guess my friend Ron Corcoran, who's been on the show before, he's a big Twin Galaxies guy. As you know, Twin Galaxies at twingalaxies.com tracks all of the world records for all video games on all consoles and all platforms for the entire world. They publish a book every year. This year, two books wide of everybody's high score on every game for every platform. It's a great thing. Twin Galaxies is a big supporter of CGE. They'll be there. And Ron is going to be running a contest, a video game playing contest. And get this, he's got a full-blown Coleco Atom with all the goodies, software, and a bunch of other crap. All that's going to be part of the prize. So they have some great prizes. They have cash prizes. Here's the good part. There's fellowship here, folks. These are the sort of people you want to be around. These are the sort of people that understand why you were addicted to Demon Attack. They understand why Missile Command still haunts your dreams. You could stop anybody in there and say, hey, how's it going? Oh, good. Well, what do you think of, what do you think of Bubbles over there? Oh, Bubbles was a cool game. Bubbles sucked. Whatever. Tech TV was there last year. I'm sure they'll be here this year. Going around doing interviews. I got like a 3-second blurb of me saying Space Ace, and Brian, the producer, got like a full-blown interview, the bastard. So maybe this year I'll get an interview. Anyway, CG, they have a lot of vendors. They have a lot of things set up, lots of things to do. They have a swap meet. And the swap meet, dude, I'll tell you what, the swap meet is gold. These guys drag in boxes of stuff that you've been dreaming about. Battery cases for a Tommy Digital Derby, an original Mattel Football 2, These guys wheeling these boxes of stuff. And you're walking around going, oh, man, I want one of those. Now, in a lot of cases, you need something to trade because they don't accept cash because what do they need cash for? They've got all this other stuff. They want stuff they don't have, which, of course, makes it next to impossible for you to get some things. But, people have stacks of cartridges sitting on the chair next to them. You walk up, hey, how much for that Road Blasters for the Lynx? $3. Cool. I got an extra California Games. You want to swap? Sure. And you just wander around this room and you swap crap and trade and buy stuff that you want. Trust me, it is geek paradise for classic gamers. The whole show, it's 2 days. It's a Friday and a Saturday. And if you haven't been, if you've thought about going, you want to go, we will have a booth. Myself and Brian Smith, my producer, are going to have a Retro Gaming Radio booth. We're hopefully going to have a listening station where you guys can watch and listen to original episodes without having to buy the CD. We'll have copies of the 2-disc Retro Gaming Radio archive collection for sale. You don't have to wait to pay for shipping or anything. We're hopefully going to be running interviews the whole time. We're hoping to get in contact with a lot of the big names that are going to be there in advance, slate off time for them to come to the Retro Gaming Radio booth and have us give them quick interviews. It's going to be really cool, folks. The whole show is just totally cool. CGExpo.com, there's going to be a link on the page for you, too, that you can go check out. I really recommend you guys take a look at it. And please show up, come to the booth. I'd love to meet you guys. I mean, I have such a diverse group of listeners that, I want to meet you guys. I want to shake your hand. Last year, a couple of people recognized me. I couldn't believe it because the show had been, off the air for so long. Oh, man, you're Shane Monroe, aren't you? And, I thought that was great. And I like to see who's listening to the show. I like to meet them and talk to them. One guy talked to for like 30, 40 minutes. We're just, shooting the breeze. Hey, well, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? What do you think? So it's a good time. It's a good time to be had by all. And I think we're going to have a great time this year. So do stop by and check it out. Make your reservations early. You don't want to be left without a hotel room. $50 a night for the plaza. It's a good deal. Special to Classic Gaming Expo people only. So I'd like to offer a little public service announcement here for this episode. I just received an email about the Midwest Classic Gaming Show. It's on June 30th. Some folks from the Goat Store and Marty Goldberg have teamed up together to bring you the Midway Classic. It is a sort of a mini Classic Gaming Expo for the Midwest, and basically they promise you an incredible amount of things to see and do, from pinball to video games to classic computers. The Midway Classic is shaping up to be a real classic event. Just some other little notes here from the email. Pinball was born in the Midwest, so it's only appropriate that the event will feature the classic ball and flipper game. The Goat Store will be bringing a pinball machine to the event and will be offering the chance to see how a pinball works from the inside. Fascinating stuff. The video games. One of the features to many classic gaming events is the ability to see and play with many rare systems and items, and the Midwest Classic will be no exception. The Marty Goldberg's Classic Gaming Museum will be vastly expanded this year, featuring everything from Pong to machines currently on the market. The museum will feature nearly every video game system ever released in the United States. Will also feature many of the video games related tournaments, which attendees will be encouraged to participate in during the day for lots of systems like the Atari 2600, NES, Genesis, and more. They also have some computers there. Classic computer collectors know sometimes there's nothing better than an old computer. The Midway Classic will feature many classic personal computers from Atari, Commodore, Apple, Tandy, and more. Visitors are encouraged to see if they can remember what their favorite computer games were and why attendees who still don't have them need to get their old computers back. Midway Classic is going to be a great event for anyone who wants to learn a bit more about both video gaming and computer gaming history, compete against new friends, trade games, or just enjoy the day playing great games, stated Dan Lucen of the Goat Store. The Midway Classic is going to be a true classic. This is being held, folks, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on June 8th. So you might want to go in and check that out. I will have a link for you in my link section for the Midway Classic. Sounds like if you can't make CGE, well, this will be the next best thing. Tickets will entitle the ticket holder to admission to the event, classic program, and more. Admission for the event is only $8 for those who pre-register before June 1st, and $10 for tickets after that date. This is being sponsored by some of our favorite people, Good Deal Games, the Goat Store, Songbird Productions, of course, who are still releasing new games for the Atari Lynx and Jaguar. Bless you. So, the show is on June 8th. Tickets are on sale at thegoatstore.com, and you'll have a link there to go to. If you'd like to help out with the show, or if you have any questions, feel free to email Dan Lucen at lucen@goatstore.com. That's LOOSEN at goatstore.com. I'll send you to the official homepage, and good luck, guys. I won't be making the show because I live too far away and I don't have a lot of money. So I will see, hopefully, most of these guys, though, at CGE. come August. So there's your announcement for the Big Midwest Classic. Anyway, we've got interviews lined up for next show. Brian Smith, the producer, is going to be on the show with me for the next episode. It's going to be great stuff. Again, sorry about the kind of the lax show, and apologize for my voice, and I can only imagine how this is all going to come out, being as though I sound like a frog or something. But anyway, suffice to say, thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for sticking with us. We've had a good run so far this year. We've had some exciting people. We've made contacts, by the way, with some very exciting people in the classic industry that we've already scheduled reviews around, that we're going to have people come on and do interviews. One of the guys that was a main programmer on the CD-TV, the Commodore CD-TV, one of the guys that helped write the Amiga operating system, we're going to have him on the show. We're going to have the Gearbox guy, Chip. He's going to be on the show. We've got a lot of exciting stuff coming up. So do tune in. Do check out the other archives. If this is your first show, welcome to the show. Go check out the archives. Every episode's online for you to download in MP3 format. And if you feel the urge to not have to worry about downloading everything, and you'd like to see the shows in their original format back when they were video streams, go ahead and pick up the 2-disc CD collection of Retro Gaming Radio. We sell it right on the site. And I think that about wraps up our hour. Wow, it goes so fast. So, until next time, this is Shane R. Monroe from Retro Gaming Radio saying, keep it retro.